Hello and welcome to my vlog. Today we're going to talk about a glimpse into the higher levels of heaven. According to Zabdiel, above the 10th level is where spirits start to actively participate in the creative process to lead and effect changes in our planet and any other locations a spirit may be sent to. Only after many lifetimes of trials on Earth and multiple demonstrations of being able to fulfill missions of importance would a spirit be able to graduate to such an exalted pinnacle. In the books by the Reverend Zabdiel Owen, different groups of spirits talk to him about life in heaven, using a system to help us understand that, as Jesus said, "My Father's house has many rooms," John chapter 14, verse 2, heaven has many levels. Spirits communicated with Zabdiel Owen using a number system. Each successive stage implies a higher level of spiritual knowledge and expertise. Hence, they use from 1 to 10 to denote the first 10 levels of heaven above the earth. In The Life Beyond the Veil, which is a series of 4 books, the Spirit Zabdiel talks about the 10th level of heaven and below. The Reverend Zabdiel Owen's mother spoke to him about the lower levels of heaven. Each higher sphere has its own cities, colleges, and governing organization. Each has its own particular landmarks and course of knowledge, which spirits must master in order to rise to the next level. Zabdiel, on a visit to the upper regions of the 10th level, is allowed to look up and beyond. He was invited to the roof of a 10-sided tower, a facility which processes the request from the 10th level of heaven and below, each side concentrated on a separate sphere. From his high vantage point he could make out, "Below me I saw the woodlands by which I had ascended. Further away stretched range on range of high mountains, all bathed in the high celestial light, and glittering like jewels of many colors. About some of those peaks there played a shimmering beauty which reached them from the 11th sphere, and there they seemed to be alive and responsive to the presence of high beings, whose nature was of a degree so refined beyond the circumference of visibility to one, like myself, of the 10th sphere. Yet I knew that these were come over from their own brighter region, and were on some work of love engaged in this my own, and that I rejoiced very much for the knowledge of the love and power beneficent all about me. And my only speech was silence, which spoke more eloquent words of mine could do." As he stood in silence, the guide who led him onto the roof approached him and asked if he would like to see further afield. The guide told Zabdiel that on occasion he was allowed to enable those of the 10th sphere to peer beyond their natural boundary so they could examine what lies ahead. The spirit world allows souls to catch a glimpse of the life above, so they will motivate themselves to strive for advancement. We, too, are encouraged. People on earth are given dreams, visions, near-death experiences, and other stimuli to cause them to think about the spiritual world and what it offers. We are presented with our future if we place materialism in its proper priority and live loving and honest lives. Zabdiel has heard that Jesus is reported to reside in the 15th level of heaven. Therefore, he is anxious to glimpse into the spheres above him. While he hesitates, he thinks about the immense rays of love and wisdom that shine from the higher spheres. Therefore, he accepts the gift. Zabdiel describes what happened next. "Presently he came forth, and he was changed greatly, for his robe was not upon him, but he stood naked before me, but for a circlet of flashing gems upon his brow. How beautiful he was as he stood there bathed in that soft penetrating light, which intensified about him and moved and lived, until his body was like liquid glass and gold, and shone forth increasingly, till I looked downwards and shaded my eyes from his exceeding brightness. Then he spoke to me and told me to stand before him, while he kept to my rearward, using his power upon me, but not blinding me with his radiance. Thus we stood, his hands upon my shoulders, and the light from him enveloping me also. and, streaming forth on either side of me, it shone far out, blending into the distance with those other lights far away about the peaks. Thus a lane appeared in front of me where I stood, its either side bordered with a wall of light, and the space between not dim but of lesser brightness. I could not penetrate those walls with my vision, as they swept away across the deeps and heights of the mountain tops, opening out as they went, on either side in such wise that, while I stood, as it might be, in the angle where the two walls of living flame met just behind me, yet in front it was a space of great breadth, between the walls where I could see them far away. Then he spoke again, and told me to watch this space. I did so, and there grew a vision very wonderful upon my gaze, so that I, who have beheld many beauties and marvels, have never seen aught so entrancing as this. Imagine the power to open a portal from one sphere operating according to specific divine laws to another with a more refined set, as if a mathematician went from solving a simple Bayesian probability problem to a 100 indeterminate polynomial. A spirit must be educated and gifted increased abilities to travel upwards. Each successive leap alters their basic composition, so much so that when a spirit journeys downward, they must transform themselves to fit in whatever sphere they landed. Hence, Zabdiel's guide had to create a special lens, powerful enough to not only magnify, but to translate higher order reality into lower, all for Zabdiel to comprehend what he was seeing. Nothing is by chance in the spirit realm. Zabdiel was shown this vision so he could dictate what he had seen to the Reverend Zabdiel Owen in the early 1900s, then from there to you in the 21st century. This is what he witnessed. The two rays struck one on either side of a mountain peak, which rose into the sky, a sharp needle with lesser spurs about it below. As I looked, it began to change, and I saw a temple emerge into my view, and about it were a host of high angels in robes of light, moving here and there. There was a high porch, and upon it stood a great angel who held a cross aloft, as if he showed that symbol to some congregation of people in some other faraway sphere. On each arm of the cross stood a child, one in rose-pink garments, the other in green and brown. They sang some song I could not understand, and then, as they ended, each laid his hands upon his breast and bowed his head in worship. Zabdiel saw a glimpse of a higher spiritual plane. He was able to see a group in worship. I have noticed in other communications from spirits to the Reverend Zabdiel Owen, there are mentions of children, or the images of children, playing important symbolic roles. When Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven," Matthew chapter 19, verse 14, his small parable strikes at the heart of attaining spiritual ascension. One must be childlike in their humbleness, lack of predispositions, and honest love to accept the tenets of Spiritism. Past preconceptions must be thrown away, and love extended to all in order to fully comprehend the message and the pathway to the light. Next, Zabdiel was requested to turn his attention to another location. But my guide now turned me about to the right, and another vista came into my range of vision. Upon a hillside far away, I saw a throne. It was of light and fire mingled, and there sat upon it a woman, who looked in silence into the far, far distance, unmoving. She was clad in gossamer, which sparkled like silver as her body shone through it, but over her head was a robe of violet-colored light, which fell upon her shoulders and behind her, framing her beauty in such wise that I thought of a pearl hung against a velvet curtain. About her, but below her throne, were her attendants, both men and women. They stood there before the throne, and on either side, silent and waiting. They were all of much more brightness than I, but none was so radiant as she, who sat there serene in all her loveliness. I noted her face. It was full of what carefulness which is born of love and pity, but her eyes were dark in their depths of high wisdom and power. She rested her 2 arms upon the arms of the throne, and I noted further that all her limbs told of strength, but such strength as is mingled with the gentleness of motherhood. Then suddenly she stirred, pointed with her hand here, beckoned there, waved to others as she issued in no haste, but briskly and incisively, her commands. All suddenly the crowd was in movement. I saw one party rise and fly off like a flash of lightning into the distance. Another went in the other direction, and other troops I saw bring forth horses, mount and ride away into space. Some wore flowing robes, and some were girt with what looked like plated armor. Some were parties of men, other of women, and others of men and women both. In it, as it were, in a moment's time, the sky was dotted with diamonds and rubies and emeralds, as there appeared flashing on their heavenly way, and the dominating color of the group shone back to me as I stood to gaze in awe and silence. Great forces at her command. A flip of the wrist sent legions of angels off to some great task. Men and horses arrived and left with a nod and an unspoken thought. Zabdiel could have been describing ancient men's vision of the house of the gods, where the great Hera ordered lesser gods to fulfill her wishes. With no hesitation from her troops, all would immediately respond. Zabdiel uses words like troops and describe others as wearing armor, which leads to the question, are there forces that are like an army or police force in heaven? In the book Memoirs of a Suicide by Yvonne A. Pereira, the spirit Camilo Branco writes about his time in the lower zones, or the umbral in Portuguese. Camilo committed suicide and was destined to spend the years from his death at his own hands to the time of his natural or pre-planned demise in an undesirable location with other suicides. He and a group of forsaken souls spent what seemed to be an eternity together, housed in caves along the walls of a valley. Periodically they would see a caravan, led by a banner labeled Legions of the Servants of Mary, that would travel through the valley and summon those souls whose time was up and would be taken to a hospital, another facility ran by Mary of Nazareth, to recover and to learn how to avoid suicide in their next life. Camilo describes what he saw from his perch on the side of the mountain. The column was led by a small platoon of lancers to open the way, while other lancers flanked it to provide a security barrier, making it very clear that they were very well protected against any hostilities that might come from the outside. The commander held up a white banner with his right hand, and on it we could read, written in sky-blue letters, this extraordinary inscription, which had the effect of infusing us with uncontainable and singular awe. Legion of the Servants of Mary. The lancers, shield and lance in hand, had a tan complexion and were dressed frugally, recalling the Egyptian warriors of antiquity. Heading the expedition was a venerable-looking man wearing a white physician's coat and badge. The woman on the throne, wearing gossamer which sparkled like silver, could have been Mary, or one of her assistants, commanding her great armies of mercy to recover lost souls who had left their agreed-upon course of life too early and were suffering in the lower reaches of the spirit realm. She may have been directing her attendants for this or that task of mercy. As she received pleas of assistance, she ordered her staff, complete with unspoken instructions, to perform their duty. Zabdiel continued scanning the horizon. Thus the lane of light was moved from place to place, the whole horizon round, and, at each pause, something new to me I saw. Each scene was diverse in character, but of equal beauty with the rest. In such manner I saw some of those who were of higher degree than any I yet beheld at work in the service of the Father, and when I saw, by changing the light, that my friend had withdrawn once more into the sanctuary behind me, I sighed for bliss too great, and sank down overcome with the glory of the service of God as I had seen it in operation, among those who watched us as we too worked and took account of our needs. It was thus I came to understand, as never before, how that all the inferior spheres are included within those above, and lying sharply defined, away each from its fellows. This 10th sphere included in itself all those below, and was, in its turn, included in those above, together with the others below the 10th. This is well understood here, up to our own degree, but as we advance, this inclusion of spheres becomes more complex and wonderful, and there are things to understand in it which are unfolded but little by little. This I have come to see, and am all agape for the further advance when I am ripe for it. As the earth and its surrounding spheres reach up to an unknown height, consider the intersecting spheres from other planets and the spiritual sphere enveloping our solar system, all interconnected, all actions affecting the others, all managed by probable power. The immensity of it all strikes Zabdiel with force. He had thought, but didn't fully comprehend the structure of the spirit universe that God created until he peered out from the rooftop of the watchtower. He let us inside his thinking. Oh, the wonder and beauty and wisdom of God! If what I know be but a little of his scheme of love, then what must be the whole be like, and how tremendous! Veiled are even the lower glories of the heavenly lands from mortal eyes, which strain to see them. Brother, be content to go slowly in these things. Such things are veiled in love and mercy, for, could they burst upon you in their fullness, your mind would give way before it all, and you would for long ages fear to go ahead, lest worse befall you. I see it now at once I could not. It is wise and good, all wise and altogether good, and he is love indeed. Like a small child watching his brothers and sisters go to school, only knowing that they take a backpack and a lunch, but beyond that little else, we too are but babes in the woods, living woefully with our own misconceptions. The major delusion being is that we don't need to strive to enter heaven only, just be ourselves. We confuse unconditional love with the freedom to enter heaven in any state of development. Zabdiel provided us with his illustrations of heaven to motivate us. The scenes painted by Zabdiel are on the mantel, waiting to be taken hold of, but only if we work for them. Our efforts must be turned inward. First, improve our inner self. Lower the priority of adding material possessions and raise the hours spent on building character. Add to your capacity for love, charity, fraternity, and honesty in every situation. Make this your path, and you too will one day view the highlands of heaven. If this small peek, this glimpse into the higher levels of heaven and what it is all about, interest you, I urge you to read my book, Spirits and the Spirit's Universe. You will begin to understand what we really are and what you will become when you ascend into heaven and become a spirit, and to one day become an angelic being with immense power to help and to serve humankind on their path to ascension. God bless.